Good afternoon to everybody who is listening to us in this webinar on virality, and especially virality in times where virus is a word that probably everybody is associating with something really negative and with something that impacted our lives in the last 6 weeks to an unpreviously unthought extent. I think I'm grateful that I get the chance today to talk about the marketing implication of virality, because in the advertising and marketing world, virality simply means the spreading of online content. And we're going to see in today's webinar why this is important, what can be done about this from a marketer's side to fuel it when it should be fueled. So when it's something that benefits us as a company or as a marketer, how to design content in such a way that it's more likely to be shared and spread around the web. So what are the elements that predict whether content is likely to go viral or not, even though we can never predict it to 100%. There are certain elements that we know by now that are important. And then last but not least, we're going to look at how to also prevent virality if it's potentially bad for our environment and for our company, right? So this is a little bit what we will be doing in this session. When we talk about virality as such, or when we start, before I start getting into the topic, basically you can see in your Zoom control panel on the bottom that the chat is disabled for this meeting. However, we have the Q&A box up. So whenever you have any questions, I'll try to answer the questions channeled at the very end. But whenever you have a question, please write it into that chat box. And we have some people in the background working. They will also look at the questions so that they don't get lost, because sometimes you want to ask something, and if you don't have something to write it down, write it in the Q&A right away, and we'll get to it at the very end. For the sake of fluency of the entire talk, I'll have decided to push these questions towards the end. However, this is a little bit what we're going to do. So what is virality and what makes content go viral, and how can marketers take advantage of that, or how can't they, and how can they prevent bad virality from happening? First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Jan Meyer, as said on the first slide. That gives a certain image. You can also hopefully see my face in the recording. However, this is a little bit how I look in a leisure setting, in a professional, in an academic setting, and in a professional consulting-based setting, because that's basically what I do. First and foremost, I try to live as much as a fulfilled life as anybody. Then secondly, my primary profession is being a university professor at IQS School of Business in Barcelona in Spain. And I also try to bring as much of my knowledge to practice as I can. So on the one hand, I love to give webinars like this. And on the other hand, I really like to also consult companies about several issues. So as my name gives it away, my nationality is German. However, I have studied and lived for 8 years in the Netherlands. I studied at Maastricht University, where I got my bachelor, master, and doctoral degree, and worked at a psychiatry in conjunction with my PhD. I consulted them how psychiatry can do marketing, basically. After that, I moved to Mexico, and I worked at the Tecnológico de Monterrey, one of the better known private institutions of Mexico, and I worked there for 4.5 years. I worked with a professional Mexican soccer team and several national brands in terms of consulting on digital and retail related issues. And then I moved for half a year to San Diego, in which I which I worked at the University of San Diego as a visiting scholar, and I was able to consult an analytics platform on the public fears of artificial intelligence and things like that. So this is a little bit of my background that happened before I moved to Spain. My research interests are digital marketing and consumer behavior. So this is also what I'm doing right now. I was hired at IQS as a professor for digital marketing and consumer behavior. So I'm happy that you are with me. And now that I've talked enough about myself, let's get to the core. In marketing and in the world as such, we have seen some tremendous changes over the last decade. The digitalization is the major driving force before COVID-19, I guess. And we do see that a lot of things have changed. The way consumers behave, the way consumers buy have changed a lot. And if it hasn't changed 100% of the population, now this lockdown will have pushed all the digital deniers over the edge to start installing Zoom. Even my dad now knows how to do a Zoom conference, and he is in his 70s and only sits on board meetings and typically is not really enjoying emails and things like that. So I've heard the joke a lot in the last times that the COVID-19 had a stronger impact on company digitalization than any chief digitization officer. However, what does digitization mainly do to consumption? Now, when we start at the consumption process, nowadays we talk about a different reality. Some of you who have some knowledge in marketing might remember that back in the days we talked about a framework called AIDA. That's attention, interest, desire, action. That's how any classic advertisement is built up. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just now that we need to adapt to the new reality, and that's why scientists have developed a new framework, which is now the main thing for digital and omni-channel consumption. So in that sense, that consumers go through the following stages. They go through awareness. So first of all, they need to know that a product exists to buy it, right? That hasn't changed. That was the same in the old model as well. Then the interest and the desire are wrapped up together into a phase which we now call appeal, that I move from I know to I like. And then I move on to ask. So to gather information and to ask my social network, and then to act, which means I buy, right? Action, and then advocacy. So we do see that the digitalization has introduced two new stages into the consumption process. The ask stage, people interacting with each other about products, interacting with the company about products. So what we're seeing nowadays is really that we moved from classic marketing where TV stations, where the marketer shouted their message through mass media consumption, has really evolved to a dialogue or to a trialogue, because the consumer, on the one hand, participates. The consumer now can talk back. He can immediately ask the company via social media or sending emails or going to the store. He can ask in person with the company and ask about more product information. Then once the consumer purchased a product, the new part is advocacy. That is what was used to be known in the past as something like loyalty, engagement, and things like that. In order so that this framework can exist of 5 A's, advocacy is the same thing, basically, for those who have not heard about this. But what does advocacy entail? Advocacy basically means that the consumer takes charge in, or takes a vital role in the spreading of information and in the spreading of marketing stimuli and in information as such. Basically nowadays, when I like a brand, I can say that on my social media, and everybody who is interested in that can hear that. Or I can write a restaurant review on Yelp or Twitter, and anybody interested in that restaurant in the world can read my review. So I can advocate in a positive or in a negative way about as many companies, products, services as I like. And this is new. These two things, that people can interact with each other in an unconstrained way, that my potential audience as a consumer is just as big as that of the huge conglomeration. That is new in the digital environment, and this needs to be taken into consideration. So this power of the consumer of spreading information is really what's below the phenomenon of virality, right? The consumer now takes charge in spreading, or takes a vital role in spreading and propagating information online. And this is really the shift that we're talking about. Now, when we move on to virality, so this is the new reality. This is the underlying digital changes that made virality and viral marketing a big thing, right? Now, when we talk about virality as such, we can first look at what the dictionary definition says. And basically, this means that virality is the tendency of an image, video, or piece of information to be circulated rapidly and widely from one internet user to another. And that is the quality or fact of being viral, right? So in the same way, as an infected person now can spread the COVID-19 virus to others. In this case, somebody who is emotionally infected by some stimuli on the internet can show that to their own, his or her own social network. And this is basically what's going on, right? And now we have all learned in the last weeks what this means. This means exponential growth. because if one person spreads it to 3 persons and each of these 3 persons spread it to another 3 persons, we have immediately 9 persons, and so on and so forth. And a lot of countries painfully, and in a lot of societies, we had to learn painfully what exponential growth means, because the infected cases grew exponentially before the lockdown, and the death cases in some places grew exponentially as well. And now if exponential growth was in the past something that was always very hard to explain to students and to non-academics sometimes, because I also don't remember my math classes very well when they told me what exponential growth entailed. Nowadays, we have this case at hand that really showcases us what is exponential growth. And this is literally the same thing when we talk about virality and online virality, about information. So when we talk about this practically, what is necessary for online virality? I need to have some idea of content. I need to have some stimulus, a picture, a video, a quote, text, anything that can be shared, right? I need a piece of information. I need an idea put into some sort of informational message, and I need a network. If I am not connected online, nobody will ever see what I tweet, right? For instance, if I put a Twitter account and I tweet every day funny sentences, if nobody follows me, nobody will see it, right? So we need 2 things basically in the first place. We need some sort of content, and we need some sort of network. And these 2 things are prerequisites for any virality. So a company, if they want to have, if they want to be talked about online, they need to have an online presence, and they need to create content, because if they don't do either of the 2, it's highly unlikely that their contents go viral. Can still happen, induced by third parties, but is of course less likely. So this is the first thing. Then when we talk about virality as a phenomenon as such, we've seen in the definition that it's about speed and number of people looking at it. So typically when we talk about virality, we need reach. We need a lot of people. And virality is typically something that moves on fast. Exponential growth is fast. We've seen that with COVID, and we see that that on one day on the internet, some phenomenon is really popular and the topic of the moment, and 2 days later it's forgotten and gone. So we do see that virality is something that starts extremely fast. So we need reach, speed, and in the end, virality is something that is driven by self-sufficiency. In this case, this is something, when we talk about viruses, we do see that right now. The self-sufficiency in COVID kept the infections coming at the moment where we were still going out like normal people. Right now that we are all staying at home, the infection rate has dropped. The virality is not fueled anymore, because the infection from one person to the other is not as easily possible anymore. So when we put this into a real phenomenon, for instance, about virality, you might remember the weird Korean singer Psy with his smash hit Gangnam Style. In case you have never heard about Gangnam Style, Google it after this presentation and listen to the melody, and I'm sure you will have heard about it. It was a real weird Korean song that went popular in 2012. So we can see here the curve of YouTube clicks of this song, and Gangnam Style was exponentially growing and staying popular for a very, very long period of time. Now, interestingly, when I asked my students then, what did this Psy singer do after Gangnam Style? Interestingly, he had a second hit, which was called Gentleman. That's the gray curve. Now, if we look at this, this is not really viral in that sense. Viral means spreading. What Psy did when Gangnam Style became popular and people were passing on this weird, funny Korean song all over the world, that took some time, and it grew organically from one internet user to another. So it stayed popular for a fairly long period of time. So that means once he had released that song, a lot of people knew about him. And at the moment when he released his second song, everybody wanted to know, what does this weird, funny Korean guy next? So everybody looked at the second song, yet nobody spread it, right? Everybody looked at it once, and that was basically it. So the second song only was the classic thing of somebody having a large reach, but it didn't have any self-sufficiency, and it didn't have any spreading in it, because once he had a lot of followers, his publications were simply seen by a lot of people, but nobody really shared his second song. Why did nobody share his second song? It sounded exactly like the first one, so there was no element of surprise in it anymore, and it wasn't funny anymore. A joke is only so funny if you hear it for the second time. And we're going to see later on why actually, for what reasons content like Gangnam Style can actually be interesting as a showcase to go viral. And then not to mention that this dude also had a third song, but that was even less of an issue. So in this case, we can see Gangnam Style was truly viral because it stayed popular for some time, while the second song, Gentleman, was not really. In this case, he just had a huge audience. Everybody clicked on it once, but everybody said like, okay, this is boring. Why would I follow this, right? So this is basically virality as such. So if we talk about virality, reach and speed are not enough. I need to have the self-sufficiency, the spreading process. Otherwise, it's not really viral. Something is not really viral if a lot of people have seen it. It gets viral if a lot of people talk about it and pass on the information. It's the advocacy, what I talked about in the beginning, that we're looking for. Now, hoping that this is rather straightforward, I move on to the next part and talk about what makes content go viral. So this should be the heart of our presentation, and I hope I haven't lost you so far. When we talk about what makes content go viral, there are a ton of factors in the literature. The academic literature on this has grown a lot in the last years. I have been lucky enough to work on a project myself. If I have time, I'll be as ego and self-centered that I'll talk about it. In case time doesn't allow me, I've pushed this to the end because I have a specific case about this. So let's see whether we get there. However, when we talk about what makes content go viral, typically, of course, it's the content itself that determines primarily whether something goes viral, right? And we're going to talk about this primarily. So, for instance, you might remember this is Internet Stone Age. In 2014, there was a very popular social media phenomenon that went viral that was called the Ice Bucket Challenge, where people put on a bucket of ice and dropped it on their head. And this was a campaign to create awareness. And now for some rare diseases, and now I have forgotten which one. That also tells us sometimes about the advertising effect of a viral campaign. Everybody knows the content, but the brand wasn't clearly tied to it. So I don't remember which disease it was. Maybe some of you tell me afterwards. So first of all, we talk about the content of the content itself. So what is in it? What content-related factors make things more viral? The second part is the source. So I put the image of Donald Trump right here because Donald Trump is basically the king of online media, even though it is hard for me to admit that. But there are very few people who manage to have as many followers, to receive such a massive engagement on whatever they say, to stay on top of the headlines in all newspapers daily. And that since the moment when he put himself up for election, he is a global topic daily because of the content he generates. And as sad as this may be, there is an academic case to see and analyze why his strategy works as it does, right? We can learn a lot from anything that is successful in its own regard, because you can't deny the success in that sense that he is one of the most followed people on Twitter. He wasn't tired of saying now during a coronavirus press conference that he was very proud to be #1 on Facebook too. Completely inappropriate in my opinion, yet he is. So who says something, of course, is important as well, right? And this goes hand in hand. The content about what is said and who says it, of course, in any communication has been always a factor. The thing is, for virality, we're going to look at it analytically, how that works. And then last but not least, it also depends on the context in which something is said. So the context might change what part of the information goes viral or not. And this is interesting to see as well. And I'm going to try to derive some implications for companies and best practices in the creation of their own content and how they should manage if consumers advocate and talk about them online, right? So this is a little bit what I'm trying to do in the following. When we talk about the content of when we talk about online content, typically we talk about the valence. Valence in this case simply means if a content is positive or negative. In this sense, are we talking about something that has a positive connotation, or are we talking about something that has a negative connotation? And now if we take the online world as such, and we analyze virality as such, interestingly, research shows counterintuitively that all in all, positive content gets shared more often than negative content. It's a little bit counterintuitive, and we're going to come back to it in the contextual part again at the very end. However, the implication for companies is basically that content should be positive more than anything. This is nothing new to advertising. Advertising has always been overly positive because we fear if negative emotions get connected to our brand. However, another factor that is extremely important are the emotions. So emotions are more than just being plainly positive or negative. Emotions, I can have several positive emotions. I can be joyful, I can be happy, I can be laughing, I can be excited, right? There are a ton of happy or positive emotions. On the other hand, there are also negative emotions such as sadness, anger, or fear, and they have a different impact. We're going to see in a minute how that plays out in detail. And then last but not least, we talk about dominance, which means that we should be how we feel in control about something, how that affects whether content goes viral or not. So the first takeaway from this slide is, all in all, everything else equal, positive content is more likely to go viral than negative content. That's an interesting and good thing, I think, because we are confronted with so many negative things on the internet. All in all, it still says if we tell positive stories, we're more likely to be heard than if we tell negative stories. Then when we talk about emotions, we distinguish between high and low arousal emotions. So giving you an example of this technical language. For instance, sadness is often propagated to be a low arousal emotion because sadness is something that is within somebody's self, not as outgoing, and the emotional reaction of sadness is typically self-centered, quiet, and withdrawn from social interaction, while anger is the complete opposite. Both are negative emotions, but anger is shouting at somebody. Anger is active movement. Anger is active face. Anger is something that really is noticeable, and anger is something high aroused. That means basically that it's a very, very active emotion, while sadness at the end of the day is low arousal or a rather passive emotion. And this makes all the difference. In the internet, we always talk about high arousal emotions. High arousal emotions are the main predictor for virality. And this goes for negative emotions as far as for positive emotions. In that sense that if we are angry, if a stimulus causes anger or excitement, negative or positive, I am more likely to share it than in the same moment that if something is sad or calms me down. Why is that? What's the underlying reason that these active emotions are so successful? Emotions are contagious. And we all know right now that this virus, coronavirus, is so dangerous because it's so contagious. The basic reproduction number is higher than 1, so the virus exponentially grows. The same thing I induce into my content with high arousal emotions. If I induce high arousal emotions such as anger, fear, excitement, happiness, fun, I induce a feeling that people want to share. High arousal emotions are more contagious than low arousal emotions, and active emotions generate an active response. If something makes me happy, I want to share that with somebody else. If something makes me nervous, angry, and stressed, I will put that strength out there to other people to talk about it or to make other people join my cause of my anger. So in this case, high arousal emotions are really the reason why information is shared online. And this is the main point. So this, while overall positive information is shared more than negative information, more important than that is actually whether the emotions conveyed in the content are high arousing. So this is something that marketers should always look at. If we put out some videos, some stimuli, does it make people laugh? Does it make people excited? Does it make people maybe even nervous, and so on and so forth? Because that's what makes people share it, if it's active. This is the most important thing when we talk about virality as such. The other part is dominance. I'm going to speed up that part a little bit because dominance simply means if we feel in control or not. This can be combined with the arousal. So for instance, if we have high arousal, positive, strong emotions, active emotions, and a strong feeling of being in control, we typically trigger very happy reactions or happy and surprised or wondering reactions. While if we have high arousal emotions, such as I just mentioned, high arousal emotions with low feelings of being in control, our emotional reaction is more wide focused. And the more broader range our possible reaction is, the less channeled sharing happens, because as long as the emotions are active and positive, most sharing happens, right? Let me give some ideas what this is about. Of course, if we talk about low and low, so low arousal and low dominance, we talk about the least opportunity to go viral. To give you some ideas, this is an image that went viral in the Netherlands, where a woman was taken to the hospital for low blood sugar. The paramedics stayed behind to prepare dinner for the 5 kids who were still in the house. So we have a very positive, emotional picture of paramedics helping out in the household, and a warm, strong feeling because the situation is under control, right? This is something, this was a picture that went viral in the Netherlands for this. On the other hand, when we talk about an example of a high arousal situation with low control, this is another picture that went viral of a jaguar being in a safari car. Sorry, this is not a jaguar, this is a cheetah. The cheetah is in this safari car where it clearly doesn't belong. It probably won't do anything, but the view of this man, of course, also triggers some humorous, funny, tense reaction within us and makes us want to spread this photo. An example of a low picture in this case would be, for instance, this one, me attempting sports at age 12. This is not actually me, but probably this is what I looked when I did sports at age 12. So this means this situation is not under control and also doesn't have any high arousal emotions. So this might be this might trigger, if at all, the German term of Schadenfreude, which means basically I'm making fun about somebody else, or I pity that person, and that's why I think about it. So, however, the two primary combinations, high arousal emotions, emotional picture, situation under control, works well. High arousal situation, low control, still has a big potential. Low and low has the lowest potential of going viral. This is something that we need to take into consideration when publishing content. Okay. So what does this theoretical part, and that's my job as an academic, basically reply when we prepare content? This means that as a company, when we create content, we should always look at, are there emotions in it? Is this content specifically designed to evoke emotional reaction? And if so, are these emotions active? Because sadness is something that is very less likely to be spread online than, for instance, anger or fear. And on the other hand, happiness is also a lot better, and excitement is a lot better than relaxation in order to be virally spread. If we own content online, I would say what is important to remember: negative content or negative emotions are okay as long as they don't immediately damage our brand, but put our brand forward. That's perfectly fine. An interesting case to this is, for instance, take the beer, the Corona brewery in Mexico. As I said, I lived in Mexico before, and so I monitored this case. They are selling more beer in this crisis than ever before, because the name of Corona is so present and people love to take a picture of their Corona beer resisting the crisis. And this is something that we do see around the globe. Corona receives a lot more social media coverage and actually increased sales all around the globe with this crisis, because basically, due to a name similarity that was not anticipatable, they went viral along with the crisis, funnily. So this is something, even though the crisis is negative, it was positive for Corona. So if the negative emotions don't channel towards your brand, you can ride the wave of negative emotions without a doubt. This is something that is very well possible. So that's important. And this maybe should animate marketers to be a little bit bolder than all these boring, fake, positive commercials about product, or fake emotional commercials about toilet paper, because it's very hard to become emotional about toilet paper. Maybe if you're being funny about it, or maybe if you're being real about it and generate real emotions behind it, even if they are not 100% positive, as long as they don't channel towards your brand, they might bring you the virality that companies are looking for. They might give you the engagement and the advocacy that you're looking for. So this is basically that part. On the other hand, of course, never use sadness or use low arousal emotions the least possible. Interestingly, there's also the user content part to this. And when we talk about user content, I mean content that is not controlled by the marketer, but content that is put up by the user himself. And in this case, it is extremely important to monitor angry user-generated content way more than sad user-generated content. A angry complaint is way more likely to go viral than a sad complaint in which the consumer is using pity as a style. So an angry complaint is way more likely to be shared by others and so on and so forth. So when monitoring the conversation in digital media, companies need to monitor also the emotions in it. There are tools available that monitor that, we call that consumer sentiment analysis, and we can analyze whether a conversation is emotionalized or not. Depending on the language, there are dictionaries that count emotional words and compute the probability that a comment or a review is highly emotional. Companies can install such systems to be automatically warned of complaints that are likely to go viral and of posts and content that is likely to put them under fire, or as we say, either firestorm or shitstorm, that we try to prevent these things from happening. So what can a company do if it gets under fire? If there's a lot of negative content about a company and strong complaints from a consumer side, we typically talk about that the most important thing is to not think it, let it go away. The most important thing is immediately to identify angry complaints and reply immediately. This is the most important thing. The more time passes between an angry complaint and the company response, the larger typically the virality of that complaint will be, and the more damaged the image of the company can become. Another part that is important typically is that, first of all, an apology is necessary. An apology takes away this high arousal emotion of the conversation immediately. An apology is the main mediator in order to calm people down. And it costs some people a lot to apologize, and a lot of companies don't like apologizing. But in this case, we have to, because this is the way to reduce the arousal out of the writing. The second stage should be immediately to try to convince that person complaining to move the conversation to a private channel. And these two actions are better than offering incentives, are better than offering recompensation, and so on and so forth. So actually, these reactions don't cost that much, and they are rather straightforward in doing, and they can be even automized. At least the apology and the immediate response can be automated, and the apology can be warned by an emotional sentiment software in this case. So this is something that companies can do, and this is how companies can actually fuel that their content gets shared by using the right emotions in the content. And on the other hand, this is how they can prevent their users negatively talking about them and these messages going viral online, right? So this is mainly about the content. And I hope this became a little bit clear that it's extremely important to design content strategically, that it enhances a lot the probability of going viral. And on the other hand, to monitor user conversations about a brand consistently in order to prevent negative virality or negative shitstorms or firestorms from occurring. That's extremely important as well. Now, this is about the content. Now, we also said in the beginning, it's important who says something. This is what we call often in research social capital. And this basically distinguishes between average Joes like you and me and people who reach thousands or millions of people when they talk, right? And typically social media prefer people who have a strong reach over people who do not. And this is typically determined by the algorithm. And the algorithm knows that, okay, if Donald Trump says something, a lot of people talk about it, so it might be relevant. And he shows, and the algorithm decides to show this content of Donald Trump to a lot of more timelines and suggests this content to people who might be interested in it. So the more reactions and past reactions somebody has gotten on content, the more likely is it to be preferred in the algorithms of the major social media, which are the major content sharing platforms nowadays, right? So this is important to keep in mind. The social capital of the source who says something is extremely important. So if I talk about me, socially, I live somewhere in the suburbs of a bigger city, and I'm well connected, but I'm not super well connected. When I say something on Facebook, probably 100 people see it, and I get 30 likes. And if I post something on Instagram, I get 8 likes, and probably 20 people see it. So I am not that super well connected. On the other hand, a network can be sort of seen like as a city map, and of course, there are people who are in the mere center. If we talk about entrepreneurship, for instance, Richard Branson is one of the most popular guys in this, and for him it is he's extremely well connected, right? So he has a followership of people who admire him, who like him. So if he says something, a lot of people will hear about it. So it makes a big difference if I say something or if Richard Branson says the exact same thing. So in this case, the network and our positioning within a network is extremely important. Interestingly, it's not only the number. There are 2 dimensions of a network that are important. On the one hand, there is the number of ties. That simply means how many connections does a person have. And on the other hand, there is the so-called tie strength. This means how well connected is that person to these people. And in this case, this is something that is extremely interesting. If we take the case of Donald Trump, people either love him or hate him. So people follow him with strong, high arousal emotions. So any content he talks about is immediately retweeted by the Trump lovers as the ultimate truth, because the tie strength of Donald Trump with his supporters is very, very strong. People who like him unconditionally. And on the other hand, people who don't like him hate him unconditionally, and will also share his content and always say, look what that idiot said again. And the other says, look what my great president said again. And this double fuel of Donald Trump makes him so successful, because there is strong emotion involved even in his followership. The connections, even if he doesn't know the people in his network personally, the people admire him. So there are strong connections and there is a strong alignment in thinking. It has been shown that both things matter. The network tie strength and thinking alike is important. That's even maybe more important than the pure number of followers. If you have loyal followers that will always retweet and share your content, this also can mean that your content is more likely to go viral, right? So it's not only if I have 100,000 followers on Instagram, it's also about maybe having 10,000 extremely loyal followers who like and share everything I do. So it's both. And because if I have 100,000 bots as followers, I can fake followers. But what I won't and even if they share everything I do, they will share that to fake networks that don't really exist. So the true virality can only happen if I have a strong links with my followers. This is important as well. So it does matter who says something. And it does extremely matter what that person says. Let me give you an example of a complaining tweet that went viral. In this case, Sir Patrick Stewart, the guy that played Captain Picard in Star Trek, tweeted, "All I wanted to do was set up a new account with a Time Warner cable in New York City, but 36 hours later, I have lost the will to live." This is obviously a joke. This is sarcasm and this is funny. So funny things trigger always responses, right? So in this case, 1,800 people talked about this case of a celebrity not being able to set up a cable account. So on the one hand, he had humorous content, black humor. He's known for that. He's sarcastic. On the other hand, he's also a well-known source. He's an actor and he is known for his sarcasm. So in this case, he might also have, and Star Trek is a very emotional brand movie and series franchise. So he has probably a great deal of tie strength with his followers. And this all of a sudden makes it very different if he complains about Time Warner Cable than if I did, right? So this is an example how the content and the source interact, that Time Warner Cable in New York might get under fire, because if they get 1,800 messages, negative messages, their social media responsible person will probably think it's the end of the world. And having said that, this is just still a small one, but I like the example because I know the source and it's a funny content. So it's just a good example how these two things interact. Okay, so implications from this. The advocacy needs to be managed, right? When we talk about the last part of the 5 A's I introduced in the beginning, I need to manage my, my followers talking about me, in the sense that I should use influencers and take advantage of their enhanced audiences. Influencer marketing is basically how I can take advantage of it as a small company of this virality. I can change the source easily, or I can use a source and piggyback on a source, as simple as that. So this is basically the main reason why influencer marketing is so popular, is that influencers are able to generate this engagement that I as a company might not get, right? If I as a company have a product which is hard to emotionalize people, I must have maybe, I don't know, maybe people don't want to follow a toothpaste on social media. However, they might follow an influencer that they think is funny. So if I manage to generate funny videos about my toothpaste with that influencer, all of a sudden I might have native content which goes viral and which can be perfectly disclosed as advertisement, but it could be something that people find way more interesting than following my toothpaste account. Or as a result, maybe they will. There are a couple of Twitter accounts, for instance, Domino's, Netflix, and several others that are very funny. And that's why people follow them, even though people don't like to follow a pizza place or something like that, or a toothbrush manufacturer. If the content is repeatedly funny and nice and makes people want to share it, this is a reason for people to follow you, even if the mere product isn't a reason to follow. Because a lot of fast moving consumer brands have big troubles online to be successful. This is something how they can piggyback on that. Also, what companies can do is incentivize the spreading. Of course, companies can incentivize their users to talk about them, in the sense that Uber has done that with their application. They have always offered free rides if you recommend the application to a friend. If that friend downloads the application, you get a free ride. And in this case, that's how Uber viralized its diffusion process, and Dropbox did the same thing. Companies often incentivize users to talk about the ad and to reward it. So in that sense, that you have free giveaways for people who spread the ad, or that you have a raffle or things like that. So virality can be engineered to a certain degree. However, this only works as an amplifier, in the sense that if the content is bad, people still will not actively talk about them, because it's social media. People are worried what others think about them. If the content is perceived stupid, boring, or whatever, people will not talk about it. So we can amplify it at this moment by reward or incentivize users to spread it, but that still means that the content itself must fulfill with the requirements that we talked previously about. And then we need to talk about reactions that are, that when we talk about complaints, we need to react even quicker, that if the complaint comes from a well-connected person, right? We talk about user-generated content. In this case, if Patrick Stewart complains about the cable provider, that's even worse. Okay, now, last part and shortest part is the context of the context of the content. That sounds a little bit weird. So if we talk about news, typically common knowledge is that negative news spreads faster and is heard faster than positive news. And this is true. When I said in the very beginning that overall we have more positive things going viral than negative things, we're not talking about news. News indeed In news, negative beats positive. This is the mere fact that human beings want to survive, and as soon as we have a news setting, if you know the bad news coming, you can protect yourself against the bad news. So this is why we have an inherent interest in being informed of anything that can threaten our existence. This is something that evolutionary is in the human personality. However, in a non-news setting, positive keeps winning. So the content of being in news setting or in a non-news setting makes a big difference if positive or negative content is more likely to go viral, right? So this is important, that the context might modify what goes viral and what doesn't go viral. So this quote would be, if you want to be cited or talked about, sweet talk to your friends or serve bad news to the public in this case. So this is something that can be taken into consideration, and also talks about why bad news in general spread. So this is just to make clear, because I think the finding that in general positive beats negative in virality is somewhat counterintuitive, yet the empirical facts speak in this way. There are several studies who have proven that positive content, let's put it in the end, there are more cat videos on Facebook than news about the end of the world. And this is, I think, this captures it quite well. All right, this is a little bit, this is the overview of my sources. And this is the end of this presentation. Thank you very much. I hope this was somewhat insightful. I'll turn to question and answers right now. Okay. Okay, somebody, thank you, Ornella. I just got the answer that the disease for the ice bucket challenge is ALS. That's true. Stephen Hawking had it. My bad, and shame on me for forgetting, but this illustrates as well the risk of sometimes that the action loses sort of the cause in itself. Interestingly. Very good. Great. Are there any other questions? Here somebody says, thank you for the presentation. You're more than welcome. I like to talk about this. I hope that got across a little bit, and I hope it wasn't too theoretical. I'm an academic at the end of the day, so sometimes I get carried away and excited with theories. Okay. All right. I still see that we still have almost all participants being in here. So I'll monitor the Q&A section, but then let me talk about, you work in the tourism sector. After this context, how could marketing reassure clients to travel and consume tourism services? Okay. Now, these are, this is a very good and very strong question. I really like it. How do I relate this to this topic? So first of all, if we talk about the situation as such, people will be dying. No, that's a wrong word. People will are starved to interact socially, to do nice things, to retake their travel plans. So I think there's a lot of compensation going on. In this case, what I would recommend for companies is to use positive emotional images, and combined with a clear message that there is no that there is the best sanitary practices are taken care of in the hotel, and that there are COVID-19 proof measures to keep the social distancing while enjoying the vacation. This contradiction might be a little bit difficult, but that's probably the main thing that I would be doing. What is interesting when we talk about marketing and product marketing, I know of a study that looked at, in the case of high risk and high complexity of a decision, with which tourism, taking up tourism after such a crisis certainly is, people have a high perceived risk because they don't know how is the situation exactly at the destination, and they have to evaluate their decision. So at that moment, informative and arguments are extremely important for the virality. So a tourist destination that can have an active certification, that can have a clear strategy, a state or government approved strategy that allows tourism to happen, would be probably something that would, next to positive emotional content like coming back, is your vacation is coming back, or your vacation is not lost, next to something, having this informational part of it would be a very good good idea. So I hope I clarified a little bit that. In a case of high risk, high involvement, informational content becomes more important in virality. It's just not the majority of viral content that we do see online. Thank you, Natalia. Then there's Mark, who asks me about, what do you think about the recent issue about an influencer who complained about too slow delivery, attacking Uber Eats or Deliveroo? Okay, I haven't heard about that particular question, but it's a very interesting one. So very good point. This has the potential of influencers becoming abusive. There were also already influencers who complained about clubs not letting them in for free and things like that. This is something, I would say, a temporal phenomenon, or the general phenomenon, the source phenomenon. People who know that they have an audience will use that audience. Donald Trump has used that always. Even worse, people in the past, like Nazi Germany, used that. An audience can be always used at somebody's advantage. And this is something, as a company, I would always watch out, who am I collaborating with? And really monitor well the influencers that I choose in order to get out from politically problematic people, for instance. However, on the other hand, if a service is bad, or if there's an objective complaint to it, I don't have any problem, because the influencer probably will get more attention if he complains than I, and maybe the company will do something about improving their service. I hope this answers a little bit your question. Next question. Any particular examples for successful viral content from startup as opposed to established companies? Yes. My best example is a couple of years or several years old, but I already talked about it. Dropbox, for instance. Dropbox was a small, tiny startup that no big company wanted to buy, and they just made a small little video. That video went viral, and like that, they grew as a company. And in the same way, any company can create nowadays. Video production costs have dropped tremendously. What we see right now with this new communication system is literally a democratization for companies. You are a small startup. If you make funny, relatable, clear videos and start out in the right community, like in the technological community, for instance, in which you are based in those Reddit forums and so on and so forth. If you start there reaching out to your customers, this is exactly what will make them engaged. And if it's funny, they will share it because they see no commercial or less commercial intentions behind it. So I do think this framework even applies stronger on the content creation side to startup companies, because it's actually feasible to be funny, witty, ironic, and to connect immediately with your known audience, and making these people spread it further than big companies, where any communication needs 3 confirmations and you have a brand manual that is this thick. This also causes that big corporations sometimes are perceived to be slow in the online environment. So I think the advantage is on your side in this, and some companies from very small scale have shown that this can be worldwide successes. Okay, at the end, most people take part about about the poor writers having a low salary. Okay, thank you, Mark. So this takes back the influencer issue of complaining about. So in this case, the influencer came under fire because he criticized some of the most unfortunates in society. Okay, I mean, then that's bad luck for that influencer, right? I mean, if you do That's I would also take this side of the social side of the writer. I was thinking they were attacking for poor technology or poor company standards, because you could also attack Uber for badly paying their riders, for instance. That would also be, I didn't know that case. Thank you very much. But good, I like that even better, as you said it. Okay, to what extent do you think virality is really influenceable and not only luck? Okay, it's a nice question. I like it. Let me think about it. And my academic answer is, of course, it depends. However, I can have, if, let's say, I can never know exactly how viral something goes. Predicting the exact number of YouTube views of a video is impossible. However, the potential, given the parameters I've set, I probably can predict whether it has the chance of going viral, and contents that lack either the source or the right contextual factors, content that don't either have a right source and no right content, will not go viral first, and in very, very low probability. Then if I have the right content, I probably, if I have clearly structured high arousal emotions, positive content, that probably enhances my odds of going viral by 40%. And then if I combine that with the right follower, with the right source, I might even predict at least that I get, that I go into the thousands of views instead of only getting a few hundreds. I can predict these things quite well. Not these exponential peaks, because as we have learned, they double and triple and quadruple really fast. But the overall idea, whether people will like it or not, can be predicted with this, probably at a 70% rate if we make an econometric model, probably. I have invented a kind of equipment that sterilizes things so fast that they can be used at home. How can I start propagandism to sell virally? Thank you, Aria. Okay, this is a very challenging question. First of all, I would focus, is this a product that, let me make up things. I don't know the product for sure. So what is an interesting thing to look at is, for instance, if we can sterilize things really fast and that they can be used at home, that probably is something that is now very important for families that want to feel safe and want to feel good about being together as a family and being able to have safe devices at home. So something like that, a familiar, touching, emotional security. And more the benefit of your technology than the technology itself, because it's emotions that make virality and not facts, unless that thing is extremely, extremely expensive. So if you go for the emotional side of the benefits of your invention, I think that is a stronger sense of going viral than not. I hope this helps a little bit. I am thinking of a movie scene, actually, with a movie with Seth Rogen, and that could be very inspirational. If you don't mind, how can you send me your email, and I'll send you that movie piece later. If you don't mind to write your email address here in the Q&A, that will mean that at max 20 people will have it. If you want to share me your email, and I'll send you that excerpt from the movie piece later, illustrating how you can maybe do something like that, okay? If you want to. If you don't want to, you have all right to protect your privacy. Then there's just no way that I can reach out to you. Thank you very much, because I don't remember the name of the movie right away. So I'll send that to you in a bit. Thank you very much. All right, I think it's 6 o'clock. So if there are no further questions, I was very happy that there were such nice and detailed questions. I hope I could help a little bit clarifying the myths of virality, right? I can't predict if something will have 1 million or 4 million views, but I can predict the odds of something being successful online or not. That is for sure. And success probably saying, if I have 10,000 followers, whether a post will have 100 likes or 5,000 likes, this is the dimension that is very predictable here. And I hope, and other than that, stay stay healthy, and hope to see you soon in an IQS executive education class. Hope to see you soon, maybe in person at IQS, if that is ever possible. And if not, maybe in the next webinar. Thank you very much.